And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 48, I want to remind you guys of a few things. I want to make sure you guys like and subscribe. Our podcast is growing, and we want to continue for it to grow. So in order for that to happen, you guys have to like and subscribe. Also, I want to shout out Grind Clothing Co. because they are our official merch sponsor. And you can find sweatshirts like this one. I love this design. It's my personal favorite. We also have this design in a zip-up hoodie, which looks awesome. We have bucket hats for sale. And then we have a couple different hats for sale and tank tops, t-shirts, stickers. So make sure to click the link in our YouTube bio or in the description below, and that will shoot you right to Grind Clothing Co.'s website, and you can see all kinds of different designs and options. We appreciate Grind Clothing Co. for our fun partnership, and make sure to rep your favorite Detroit Pistons podcast. Also, we are going to be talking through an interesting topic this week. So if you have anything that comes to mind or opinions or statistics that we didn't mention that come to mind to you, make sure to comment below because we would love to know your guys' thoughts on this topic because we're Pistons fans just as much as you are. We love taking in Pistons content, and you guys can help with that also by commenting below. Also, there is a bell on our YouTube channel that is the push notifications button. So if you click on that button and select all, that means you will get updated whenever we post on our YouTube channel, so you can be in the know about all the Detroit Pistons news sooner than everybody else. So make sure to smash that push notifications button. Without further ado, episode number 48. The last couple weeks, and actually a couple months during Revved Up Recaps, we talked about this a little bit. We talked about the possibility of Bojan Bogdanovic getting traded. And about a month ago, we talked about what it might look like if he got traded to the Memphis Grizzlies. Well, the talk is continuing in this topic about the Milwaukee Bucks possibly wanting to trade for Bojan Bogdanovic. So that is what we are going to be talking about this week. The trade overall, the details would be the Milwaukee Bucks would receive Bojan Bogdanovic, only him, and then the Pistons would receive Bobby Portis, Grayson Allen, and a 2029 first-round pick. To kind of start off, what are some of the reasons why we want to see Bojan in a Pistons jersey, why we don't want to see him in a Pistons jersey? Talk about the positives and negatives of trading him.
Well, the positives of keeping him would be his offensive playmaking ability. He is one of the best shooters in the league, if not the best. His basketball IQ is pretty darn high, and he makes smart plays.
Yeah.
He really doesn't force anything offensively other than a shot from time to time, which is a negative.
Yeah.
But he's cream of the crop. He's one of those guys that you want on your bench. He's one of those guys that you want as a good role player. He's even a good starter in most cases.
Yeah.
He's just one of those guys that at the end of the day, he does his job. I mean, when you pay the man $30+ million a year to go out there and shoot, that's what he does, and you can't deny that. The negatives, though, would be if you look at what he did when he was forcing shots up, he'd take away opportunities from like James Wiseman or others in our young players' perspectives. And so from that standpoint, it is a negative.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of positives about Bojan too.
One of my positives for Bojan is we saw him last year average 21 points. And we all know that for players to reach 21 points in today's NBA is difficult to do with all the athletic bigs, with all the length in today's NBA. It is hard to reach that 20-point mark. We saw Bojan do that for the Pistons last year. He was actually the only Piston to do that with longevity. We saw him play 59 games last year. For a guy that's 34, 35, I believe, it kind of worries me because we see when guys get older, they play less and less games.
Yep.
And to see Bojan already only playing 59 games in an 82-game schedule, that kind of worries me a little bit. It's not necessarily a complete negative, but it's something that's a little bit worrisome for me. And we're going to see in today's trade that it was common for the Pistons to trade for young guys or youngish guys. We saw Bobby Portis and Grayson Allen be two of the guys we're going to be trading for, possibly. Let's start with breaking down Bobby Portis. Bobby Portis last season averaged 14 points, 9.6 rebounds, which is what I love most about his stat line, 1.5 assists, and 49.6% from the field. So pretty efficient. And then played 70 games and throughout the season, which I love. We just talked about Bojan kind of struggling with the games played department, and then 75 games, including the playoffs. Your first thoughts on Bobby Portis?
He's one of those good role players that, I mean, when I say that, it's as of lately. If you look at the earlier parts of his career, he couldn't really find a team. He couldn't really establish who he was. He was just one of those guys trying to make it in the NBA today.
Yeah.
And that's what's helped him grow into what he is now. When you look at what he was the last couple of years for the Milwaukee Bucks, he's been one of those key role players to get the job done when they needed him the most. He's been one of those key guys where he's going to go out there and drop 20 if he really has to.
Yeah.
And that's just something big and crucial that you need to look for from time to time. He's one of those gritty kind of players. There's not a lot of people like him in the NBA today, but he is one of those types where he puts his head down, goes to work, and he doesn't care if he hurts feelings.
Yeah.
He's just wanting to win and get another championship.
To me, like, just from the film I've watched on Bobby preparing for this episode, he reminded me a lot of a beef stew, because he is, for being, I wouldn't say scrawny, but he's very long. Stu's not as long as Bobby, but he's very physical in the paint. And we saw, Beef Stew average very similar statistics-wise. We saw Stu get at the 11-point mark, 8 rebounds and 44% from the field. As far as Bobby, I like his play. I like his play style. But being so similar to Beef Stew kind of worries me, because I don't know if we want two guys so similar on our roster, because Bobby's a little bit better at the 3-point line, but then Beef Stew makes up for the defensive presence. Yep. So it's like, for me, if they get put on the floor together, I see our offense kind of being stagnant. And we see Bobby a little bit taller in height than Stewart. It's kind of interesting, because they're both like flirting with the power forward position. So does that mean one or the other takes minutes from each other? Does that mean we see Stu at the center position when Bobby's on the floor at power forward? But then we get in the mix of, okay, then what do you do with Marvin Bagley? It kind of, I think if this trade happens for a guy like Bobby, it puts even more question marks on this roster than we already have.
Yeah. And honestly, Bobby is one of those guys that I wouldn't mind on this team in a playoff run. I wouldn't mind him at all. But it goes back to what you just said when you look at our roster, the way it's shaped out to be already. Obviously, adding Bobby Portis in, you would have a question mark around Marvin Bagley for sure.
Yeah.
You'd have a question mark around Isaiah Livers, who already has a question mark already. You'd have a question mark around potentially Isaiah Stewart, maybe. And then even a lot of people in the Pistons community don't really see a future with James Wiseman, which would add another question mark there. It's just, this is one of those kind of trades where it doesn't make sense, but it does at the same time. If you're looking for a championship run, I'm not saying our team is anywhere near or close to a championship, but if you're looking for a championship kind of caliber of a player to add, you'd want to add Bobby Portis. But then in return, you have to pretty much blow up your roster if doing so. And I just don't see the upside there. But he is one of those guys where I wouldn't mind him at all.
Yeah, he's a momentum guy, and the Pistons don't really have that kind of guy right now. They don't have the person that can come in off the bench and then just blow up a game. Bobby's the kind of guy where the Pistons play him 4 times a year. We've seen him play quite a bit, especially in the Revved Up recaps when we're breaking down the stats. Bobby's the kind of guy that can come in and really mess up a team's game plan if he's playing well on any given night. And what I like about Bobby and adding him to the roster and taking away Bojan is we've talked about it a lot where we don't know how Bojan and Cade will mix. Why I like Bobby is he can make an impact offensively without demanding the ball. He takes whatever the defense gives him. And if there's a certain team that we're playing against that's a little bit lean in the power forward position, for example, maybe the Charlotte Hornets, we see them kind of struggle in the big man category. I can see Bobby Portis being a difference maker in games like that compared to Bojan. And I just like how he takes what the defense gives him rather than force the ball in his hand and force up shots when they're not needed like a Bojan will.
Yeah, he definitely does not force shots up. That's not who he is. He looks for the best shot available. He looks for the little things to help his team win, and you can really applaud him for that. I mean, his shooting is pretty darn good. I mean, shooting almost 50% from the field,
Yeah.
37% from three for who he is, 77% at the free throw line. You can't deny his shooting ability. You can't deny his offensive playmaking. There are times where Giannis is in trouble. Chris Middleton was out majority of the season last year. They didn't really have anybody to go to when Drew wasn't out there either.
Yeah.
So it's like, who do you go to? You go to Bobby Portis because he's the next man up in that rotation, outside of Brook Lopez, of course. But just what Bobby was able to do this past season alone shows that he can play and he can stick with it and continue on this path. But my only takeaway in a negative standpoint is the fact of how old he is. He's already 28 years old. And I'm all for bringing in vet players. I'm all for that. But at the same time, with the roster we have built right now, we already brought up the fact that there would be question marks around Marvin Bagley and others.
Mm-hmm.
They're significantly younger than Bobby Portis is. So it's like you'd be getting rid of young talent for an older vet that you don't know if he's going to still be at that same level going forward or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the same situation. It's kind of like we're looking at this Bojan trade in entirety, is the fact that Bojan is 33, 34 years old, and we'd be getting him away for younger players, but the younger players would impact our younger players because they're still older. And so I don't know how that would work necessarily, but...
One thing, too, that it was one of the first things that came to mind when I saw this trade is, okay, you take Bojan out of the picture, you add in Bobby Portis, Grayson Allen, who we'll talk about in a minute. But Bojan last season was very efficient and made a lot of threes for the Pistons last year. If you take away Bojan, add Bobby, who takes that three-point scoring load? Because you can kind of say hopefully Cade fills that role, but we saw in his rookie year, he's really good from the mid-range, can struggle at times efficiently from the three-point line. But you take Bojan away, who takes that three-point scoring load?
It really would have to be guys like Alec Burks or Monte Morris, who we talked about in a past episode there. There's not a lot of guys on this team for us that are just shooters. We don't have a lot of them. The majority of the players we have right now can do a little bit of everything. And so losing a shooter in Bojan will hurt us. But at the same time, when you add a guy like Bobby Portis who can do a little bit of everything, that kind of helps. It helps the blow that we would take by losing Bojan. But I'd rather have Bojan in that situation just because shooters shoot and they get the job done. And so from that standpoint, as much as I love Bobby Portis and what he can do, he's still at a point where you could see a significant decrease going forward.
So we're trying to connect the dots on why this trade makes sense. We talked about the first facet of this trade. Now let's talk about the second piece to this trade in Grayson Allen, former Duke Blue Devil. We saw him average with the Milwaukee Bucks last year 10 for 10.4 points a game, 2 assists, 44% from the field, and then 49% from the three-point line. And I like this a lot. 72 games played, so he proved he can stay pretty much healthy throughout the season. What are some of your first thoughts on adding a guy like Grayson Allen to the Pistons?
As I like Grayson Allen. I did not like him when he was at Duke, I'll admit.
I agree.
I don't think anybody really did, except for Duke fans.
Yeah.
And Coach K. But no, Grayson Allen has turned himself into quite the NBA role player. Obviously, we first saw him in Memphis and everything and how he was playing there. He didn't play bad in Memphis. He was actually a good, solid player. But I think when you are around Hall of Fame caliber players, aka a Drew Holiday potentially, but then also Chris Middleton and Giannis, you kind of have the situation of it elevates your game to the next level.
Right.
And so Grayson Allen obviously was with Drew Holiday and such. I mean, not Drew Holiday, John Morant and others in Memphis.
Steven Adams.
But and as good as they were at that time, they weren't anything special. They weren't built the way they work now. And so when you look at the Bucks and everything, he's just in a perfect role because he doesn't have to do everything. He doesn't have to do much. He's just one of those guys that if they need him, they'll put him in and he'll do his thing.
We saw last March with the Bucks, his really best month of the year was in March. We saw him have 2 or 3 games of 25 plus points. One game where he started 7 of 7 from the three-point line. So I think that's kind of proving my point that maybe from earlier that maybe Grayson Allen will fill that three-point role a little bit in the absence of Bojan. But I believe that's him at his absolute best. I don't know if he's going to give you that consistently, right? He's not a J.J. Redick or a Kirk Heinrich. But I think that on a given night, Grayson Allen is one of those guys that could be a game changer, much like Bobby Portis. My only problem with these two guys is the consistency. I don't know if I can see them giving the type of play that Bojan did consistently. We saw Bojan, like I said earlier, 21 points a game, 4-ish rebounds. I like that a lot, and I just don't know if they can be as consistent as Bojan was. There were games here and there when Bojan would kind of struggle as far as efficiency and stuff like that, but really that's his premier of a scorer as like mid-tier guys get. That Bojan's at the top of that list. As far as Grayson Allen too, what he would add to the Pistons, we saw the Pistons draft a savvy defender this year in Asar Thompson. I think Grayson Allen would help solidify the Pistons defense. We see him be absolute torturous in the passing lanes, and as far as like tough, gritty fouls, you talked about why he was kind of hated with his time at Duke. He still kind of plays that role in today's NBA. I like that defense that he would add to the Pistons. Also, I liked your point about Bobby Portis earlier about being a good playoff guy. Grayson Allen is in that same essence. They show up when the bright lights are on and it's game time. They show up and make plays. That's the kind of guy Grayson Allen is. And, we know that Cade is kind of like that. Jaden's kind of like that. But if you can add a bench guy that can show up and make big-time plays in big-time moments or late in the fourth quarter when it's coming down the stretch, it's a neck-and-neck game. Guys like Grayson Allen can make plays that go in your favor. And we've seen in the past couple of years the Pistons struggle in the fourth quarter. I think a guy like Grayson Allen can kind of fill that role of making the big plays when they're needed. Now, as far as we talked about like why Grayson Allen would kind of make sense on the Pistons, what he would add, but do you see him mixing well with the personnel we already have on the team? Like you said, we're a very young team with guys that are still getting used to the NBA. Do you see him mixing well as far as chemistry?
I think he does. And I will throw this out there. There is a flaw of our team right now, and that's so much so that this team has been together for a while now. And so for a lot of us in the Pistons community, we've grown to like a lot of these guys on our roster. And so when we see a trade like this, in what it's proposed to be, where we add 2 good playoff caliber players to our roster, then it kind of pushes us in the direction of, well, what happens to Killian Hayes? What happens to Marvin Bagley? What happens to James Wiseman? What happens to Isaiah Stewart? What happens to Isaiah Livers? Just there's so many different perspectives to take on this. And so what I'm trying to say is we've learned to grow and love these players that we already have. And so when we have a proposal like this where we improve our roster, we kind of don't really want to, because we want to see these guys that have become household names in our community stay with us for the long haul. We want to see them grow and blossom into, I don't know why I used that word, that was weird, but we want to see them just explode and become the player that they were meant to be. And so when we see a trade proposal coming in like this, it's kind of like, oh, you know what, that really would help our team. We really would probably have more of a playoff caliber roster with them. Mm-hmm. But there's also the fact that we lose out on seeing all these players play for us. And so sitting here, I'm sure you are agreeing in this, in the sense that, yeah, as much as we'd love this trade to happen, we don't want to see others go. Mm-hmm. We don't want to see that. But truthfully, Grayson Allen would solidify our defense in the guard realm. He really would. He'd bring a whole nother level to this team. And that's something that could help grow like a Marcus Sasser, grow a Killian Hayes, grow even Monte Morris, even though he's a vet now, grow Alec Burks. This is kind of like, these are the 2 guys that you want to help build a culture. That's what you want. It's kind of like what the Detroit Lions have going on with keeping around Alex Anzalone and others, is they're keeping around these vet players because they know it's going to help build the culture that they want to set the tone for. And so adding these 2 guys in, even though we'd lose Bojan, and a great shooter, offense playmaker, I really think adding Grayson Allen from a defensive standpoint, and even his 3-point shooting, which is solid, and his shooting in general, even at the free throw line, shooting 90%. That's amazing. And then Bobby Portis, even from a defensive standpoint, is very solid. And he's one of those guys that will break you down when he can. And so just the fact that we'd bring in these 2 guys, I think it is a win in that sense. And I think they do gel with a lot of these guys on our team. But at the end of the day, do I really want to see Killian Hayes go, who I love? No. Do I want to see Marvin Bagley go? No. But it's a business. We can't, it really is a business. So I think Grayson Allen would gel with these players just fine. I think Bobby Portis would do the same.
We saw last year Grayson Allen average 10 points, 2 assists, 44% from the field, but he was surrounded by Chris Middleton, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Drew Holiday, Brook Lopez, these really great NBA players, vets per se. Say the Pistons trade for him and we lose Bojan, you put Grayson Allen on this Pistons roster. Do you see his averages growing or dipping? Because for me, putting him on this young roster, I don't know if he can get those averages. It's worrisome that maybe these vets and these all-star caliber players were really helping him get those stats. What are your thoughts?
I think they kind of grow a little bit. When you look at Bojan when he was with the Jazz last year, well, not last year now, but 2 years ago prior, you saw what was potentially a very high-scoring player. He was averaging like 15 points to 18 points a game, and that's amazing. But then he takes his next season with this past season with the Pistons. His points per game jumped up, his rebounds per game jumped up, his assists, his field goal percentage, his 3-point percentage, his free throw percentage, every single aspect of his game increased. And that's because when you're on a team that's young and underdeveloped and is going through growing pains, you're going to go to the vet. You're always going to go to the vet. So in this situation, I think Grayson Allen and Bobby Portis, I think they will stay probably near, maybe not Bobby Portis per se, as high as he was this year, but I think they will be still above the double-digit mark in scoring. I think their stats are probably going to be still very similar in rebounds and assists and whatnot. I still think they're going to probably shoot a higher field goal percentage, probably shoot a higher free throw percentage, and even shoot a higher three-point percentage. I really think from an efficiency standpoint, and then their stats, I think they will increase from where they were this past season with the Bucks in the last couple of years, just because they're going to be leaned on more so than not. But even with that being said, as I brought up earlier with Bobby Portis and his age of 28 years old, Grayson Allen is also 27. So they're still older in the sense that you don't know what necessarily could happen with those stats of theirs. Even though they could be high, there's a chance that they could be low. And so we don't necessarily know what we're going to be getting out of these guys, because every single stop that they've been thus far, it's been like they have a great season, they have a bad season. They have a great season, they have a bad season. They're not one of those guys, neither of them, that stay consistent with their stats. They're not like that. Where Bojan stays consistent with his stats, if not gets better every single year. So from that standpoint, I do think their stats are going to be just fine, but it's going to be kind of like the Bojan situation of once you get older, your stats may plummet, and we may have to worry about that going forward if they were going to be here for the long haul.
Yeah, every trade's a gamble. That's one of the reasons Troy Weaver has the toughest job in the world, because as soon as you agree to a trade, it's a gamble. You just don't know what's going to happen. You have things that you want to assume are going to happen, but you just never know. The third piece to this trade that the Pistons would receive is a 2029 first-round pick. Now, the Pistons are in a... I feel like with the certain picks that we've made, and that the Pistons are kind of in the thought process of restoring right now. They want to see production and winning this upcoming season. Do you think there's a need to get the 2029 pick, like that the Pistons are like, we need a current player right now, or they're kind of setting themselves up for the future? Why do you think their head is at the 2029 first-round pick?
Again, it's a first-round pick at the end of the day. It's going to be a good pick, no matter. I mean, it's better than a second-round pick, obviously. But the Bucks, historically speaking, the last couple of years with Giannis, they are the cream of the crop. They're going to be one of those top-tier teams. Meaning this pick is going to be roughly between picks 15 and 30 there, and so it's not going to be necessarily anything special or anything good. But if you look at their picks the next couple of years, they don't own the rights to their first-round pick in 2024. They don't own the rights to their first-round pick in 2025, 2026, or 2027, meaning the next highest pick that they have available is in 2028. So my question is, why aren't you throwing in the 2028 first-round pick and giving us the 2029 first-round pick? In that sense, I'd rather have the 28 than the 29. But it all just depends on who's coming out and when. Obviously, in this situation, in the Pistons' eyes, I'd rather aim for the 2028, just given the fact of this roster will be competing for a championship in the near future. Obviously not the next 2-3 years, but maybe 4 to 5, right? And so that would be in the ballpark of we're coming off a hot playoff run. We didn't make it to the championship, but we can still add a high-end player. Maybe the Bucks aren't good at that time, and so this could help us. And that's kind of like what I would see from that.
You know what this pick kind of reminds me of? Two examples. The Boston Celtics when they drafted Peyton Pritchard, and then also when the Golden State Warriors, now they're a dynasty, I understand, I'm not comparing, but when the Golden State Warriors were like, they were kind of having a couple down years after their championships, and then drafted Jordan Poole. This is kind of what this pick could be for the Pistons. Let's say everything goes to plan. Cade is the superstar that we have predicted. He's showing us that he can lead a team to an Eastern Conference semifinals or finals, and 2028 rolls around and we haven't won that chip yet, or we have won that chip and we need a couple guys that we've lost in free agency or traded away. Now this 2028 pick comes in and we can fill a bench role or a possible starting role with a guy. You know, I kind of changed my mind on it. Earlier today, I was kind of like, what's the point? Like, we want to be win now. Like, what are we doing worrying about 2028? But now that I'm thinking about it, I see the value in it, that say a couple of these guys don't pan out and we need a role to be filled as a good bench player, we can use that on this first round 2028 pick. My mind kind of changed on that. Now that we've talked about everything, make sure to comment below what you guys think. If this is a trade you would like to see happen, if you like Bobby, if you like Grayson, or if you don't like them. But as we wrap up today's episode, would you, Ryan, if you're put in GM Troy Weaver's, you're sitting at his desk and you can accept this trade, are you saying yes or no?
Well, from the overall value you could get out of this, it could be boom or bust. With these two players, I like them a lot, but at the same time, I like some of the guys we have going right now.
Yeah.
Do I value that pick? Yes, because like I said as my last example, it'd be a smart pickup. But I think having Bojan with us in this situation is the better option, and so I would say no.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with what you said. I like these two guys. I like the draft pick, but we just drafted Asar Thompson, and he struggles from the three-point line. We saw it in Summer League. We saw it with his time in the league he was previously in. Bojan is going to be able to offer the three-point shooting that he did last year, and I think that is so valuable in today's NBA. I don't know if I want to give that up. There's a lot of question marks with Bojan, I understand, but the gamble I just don't think is worth it. I want Bojan working alongside Asar Thompson in the practice gym, in shoot-around, and I want him to try to sculpt Asar into this 3-and-D type of player, a KCP-esque player, and I think Bojan's one of those guys that can do that, and I just think having a vet presence on this team is very crucial because we know how young guys can be, right? When you pay them millions of dollars, they can kind of, go down the wrong path. Bojan, we know, is a pro's pro. He does everything the right way off the court. He's not a gamble as far as the way he interacts with people off the court. I love that presence in the locker room. But if this trade happened, I wouldn't be like crying into my pillow as I fall asleep. I'd be like, I get it. I understand. If Troy Weaver's willing to make that gamble, in Troy we trust. I trust him. That will do it for episode number 48. Make sure to comment below if you would accept this trade. Also, make sure to like and subscribe before you click off of YouTube. And then another quick thing. I want to give a quick shout out to Campfire Coworks. They are where our studio is located here in downtown Marquette, Michigan. Campfire Coworks is an office sharing space where you can network with fellow business owners or people or local charities and nonprofit organizations. So make sure to follow Campfire Coworks on every social media platform. We are so happy to have our studios here and to be able to bring you guys nice, high quality content, and Campfire Coworks is a huge part in that. We will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.